Hello and welcome to Capital Cast. I'm Jerry Nowicki with my colleagues Brenden Moore and Ben Szalinski here in the basement of the Capitol to talk about what the Illinois House did this week. All right, obviously, boys, we had a busy week here in Springfield, even though the Senate was not in. Brenden, I'm going to start with you. Obviously, the thing on everybody's mind is the Chicago Bears, and you've become somewhat of a celebrity on Bears Twitter. You had a good interview this morning on 670 The Score. I think now 104.3 The Score in Chicago, the sports radio station the three of us listened to growing up. You described it pretty well. What's going on with that bill? The question I have for you was the bill that passed this week a touchdown, a first down, or a false start?
It's a great question, Jerry. I think probably a first down. I think false start would not be giving it enough credit because it was a significant step forward, but it's not a touchdown because they still have more work to do. I mean, it was pretty clear. I mean, any of us that follow this stuff every day know that the House and the Senate don't always see eye to eye on legislation, large and small. And, we could read between the lines here that was the case. And then the Bears came out with a statement after the bill passed saying that they need changes in order for this tool to work for them. So I think it's pretty clear that while a significant step forward, just noting that this had languished for more than 3 years in kind of purgatory here in Springfield. It was going nowhere until earlier this year when there was really an effort once Indiana kind of was put out there as leverage as the Bears might move across the state line. And then lately the NFL kind of pressuring them to make a decision that lawmakers, give them a deadline and they will finally do something. But it's clear that this is not soup yet. They gotta make some changes in the Senate, get the governor's office on board, and presumably get the Bears on board. Because even though everyone says this is a general mega projects bill, the reason it's happening is because of the Bears. Let's be real.
Well, and, we're used to the state house realm. We might have some listeners here who are just Bears fans who are seeking out information on that bill. But the House effort on this regard kind of fit a theme for the week of the chamber, going it alone. The Senate wasn't here. A phrase that comes to mind to me is when the cat's away, the mouse will play. So they didn't have to negotiate with another chamber to get, 100 and however many votes that would be. They didn't have to have two chambers, legislators on board. They just kind of did it themselves. So we'll touch on a couple other things they did here, but can you speak to the House side of it? That just the fact that this was to please House members of the caucus, but we don't know about its certainty in the other chamber.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this was just getting the 60 votes needed in the House Democratic Caucus. Obviously, we all know, and I think a lot of people that have follow this on Bears Twitter have found out that House Speaker Chris Welch has a 60-member rule. You need 60 votes among Democrats for a bill to be called. And this one got more than that, in addition to 10 Republicans supporting it. So it was a pretty strong bipartisan roll call. But getting there wasn't easy. And I think, Cam Buckner, the lead sponsor of this, really had to do he's a former football player, but I think he had to do some gymnastics to kind of make this work, to get enough folks in the Democratic caucus on board. A big provision in this House bill is the property tax relief provision that would basically siphon away half of a payment in lieu of taxes towards direct property tax rebates to taxpayers. And so that helped win over some votes in the House. It may create some problems, though, because who is to say that, these taxing bodies wouldn't just ask for double to make sure that they get their money from the Bears or any other mega project. So it very much was a exercise of getting it out of the House, getting the votes. I think again, it wasn't explicitly said on the floor, but there was alluding to even from Buckner that there may be some changes coming in the Senate. This may be back. That this is not final. But again, I think there had to be some type of signal this week that they are moving the ball down the field because NFL owners are meeting next week. The stadium committee of the NFL is meeting next week. They want an update on the Bears' progress, and I think it would have been hard for George McCaskey and Kevin Warren to go there without saying, "Hey, they passed a bill. They're making progress." If they had left this week without doing anything, then I think I want to say Indiana would be the favorite, but I think that Indiana would certainly maybe be more so in the driver's seat.
So you use the word gymnastics there, Ben. I'm going to sort of direct this to you. I saw some gymnastics from one particularly conservative member, one particularly liberal member. It seemed like they were convincing themselves why their vote on this was important and why it was a good thing to do. I won't name their names, but it was an indicator to me that you've gotten some of the lawmakers from each side of the spectrum to get on board with this, that you'll need to get it over the finish line. But Ben, I'll pose this question to you. How many things did they need to tack onto this bill? I was sitting next to you in the gallery and I said, Ben, what was the length of the original bill? And you said 30-something pages. And I said, and how many pages is this bill? 377, I think you said. So page number doesn't always mean everything in the General Assembly, but it's 10 times longer than it once was. So what did they tack onto this to get this type of broad agreement?
Well, they put so much onto it, and in some ways there was kind of a little bit of something in it for everybody. At least if you're a downstate lawmaker from Springfield or from Chicago, even lawmakers here in Springfield got a proposal that they've been floating. Both a Republican state representative and a Democrat state senator have wanted this economic development tool for downtown Springfield, which has been struggling economically for a few years. And that's in this bill that is generally revolving around the Bears. We heard one of the most prominent members of the House, Jay Hoffman from the Metro East area. He stood up and talked about the importance of having this Springfield component in this megaprojects bill, about how lawmakers are living in Springfield for 4 to 5 months a year, and that they're going to be personally benefiting from revitalizing downtown Springfield. And that's just, I think, one thing in this bill to get more votes on board. And ultimately the Republican lawmaker from Springfield and the Democrat who also represents parts of the city, they both voted for this bill. And then in Chicago, we saw tons of new things that are going to allow some of the state's economic development tools, like star bonds, which is kind of a complicated sales tax thing that is ultimately used to improve development in underutilized areas, will be eligible for certain types of projects in the city of Chicago. There's a lot of thresholds, as far as needing these to be big projects that are going to attract, upwards of 2 million tourists a year in some cases. But a lot of that stuff was designed to get Chicago Democrats in support of this legislation, because when the Bears leave, it's only 9 days a year that Soldier Field has fewer events, but there's going to be a new big stadium either in Hammond or in the suburbs that the big concerts, the big events can all go use. And I think Chicago lawmakers want some sort of guarantee that the city's not going to be left behind, and that all this economic activity and the tourism isn't going to just float off to communities outside the city.
Now, we've seen this with bills in the past. Gambling bills come to mind. Sometimes these things, in an effort to gain compromise, they just collapse under their own weight. I don't know whether this will be one of those occasions. I don't know if either of you have a thought on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly possible just because, you know, the governor had said last week that there was a structure or a framework of a deal, and that the parties were generally in agreement on that, and this was some sort of legislation that could pass through both chambers and get signed by the governor and get approval from the Bears. Then the House kind of does the House thing, and they add on other things that really hadn't been talked about, at least in the context of a mega projects bill, a Bears bill. And now we all have questions where the governor is saying, I need to review this legislation. The Bears are asking for more changes. And, we have seen this before in Springfield where a bill just gets a little bit too big and it makes it harder for, it to pass both chambers and get support from all the parties involved. And there's a lot of parties involved in this.
Yeah, I would like to add, I mean, there's a term we use for this Christmas tree bill or omnibus bill where everybody gets a little bit of something, and which helps win votes, but also it can help pull away votes if you have competing interests. Gambling bill is a good example of that. But I think when we've seen big things pass in this state, there's often like a big reason for it, a deadline or a desire to do something. Like when the gambling expansion bill happened back in 2019, it succeeded where past ones had failed because they wanted to do a big capital construction program and they needed money to fund it. And how do you fund it? Well, you do new casinos, you do sports betting, you do all of that. So I think something similar could happen in this case with the mega projects bill, and that again, this is an idea that's been out there for a few years and it really didn't go anywhere, but now the legislature kind of has a deadline, the Bears are going to make a decision, and I don't think regardless of what their public posturing is, I don't think Governor Pritzker or state legislators want to lose the Bears to Indiana, not to mention the fact that the governor wants this for other projects across the state. And you have, as Ben alluded to, in Chicago, a lot of economic development opportunities that they kind of want to unlock, whether it's that one central project on the railroad tracks near Soldier Field, or there's maybe a talk of a possible White Sox ballpark in the South Loop on some Amtrak rail lines. There's provisions in this bill for that, in addition to some of the star bond provisions. So I think that there is kind of a coming together after years of this thing kind of languishing, and sometimes you just need to give the legislature a hard deadline. Even on the energy bill that passed a few years ago, it really only got done after a lot of kicking and screaming, after the nuke plants basically said, we're going to shut down in 2 days. You better get something done. They got something done. And I think we could see that happen in this case, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think just to peel back the type of editorial curtain here, you guys are the two that are out working the sources on this story. You've been doing a great job reporting, but it became pretty clear to me as the editor yesterday that we can't call this a Bears bill. This is a mega projects bill. It is so far beyond how it started, and we'll see whether it's stripped down or how it works in negotiations. But one of the things that we also emphasized in our story and I thought was important was this exchange between Republican leader Windhorst and Cam Buckner. It was just the opening question, and it sort of, to me, summarized what everyone was thinking. Windhorst says, if this bill passes, will the Bears remain in Illinois? And Buckner's answer was, I don't work for the Bears, so I can't answer that question specifically. But what I can tell you is that the bill puts together the mechanisms that makes it possible for the Bears to stay here in the state. And then quickly after the vote, the Bears say, we need changes. So clearly there's a lot of work ahead, but Brenden, as you said, lawmakers need a deadline, and there's going to have to be a drop dead date for them to get this done. Otherwise, the Senate, I see no indications that the Senate's going to stop dragging its feet on this, right? Like they don't take kindly to the House dictating things anymore, especially after Speaker Madigan, exited from government. So, we'll see. I mean, it's not just some monolith of Democratic power. There's a lot of different opinions here.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, again, the House and the Senate have never always seen eye to eye. People sometimes on the outside just see a bunch of Democrats and think they all must agree on everything, and that's usually very far from the reality. And the Senate has kind of prided themselves on being more so in the driver's seat after Speaker Madigan was ousted in 2021. And I think that they are going to go through their own process in this instance. They're back next week. They have a 3-day schedule next week. I'm skeptical that we'll see any Bears bill emerge next week in the Senate. I could be wrong, but it'll be interesting to see how this plays out over the next few weeks to see if the House passing it is enough signal of progress for the Bears to let this process work out. Because one thing that I don't know if you agree, Ben, but the thing I picked up on is that the Bears want to be in Arlington Heights. They don't want to go to Indiana unless they absolutely have to. So while there is a deadline, I feel like the Bears are probably going to let the legislative process work out, especially if it is only a matter of an extra week or two. But clearly, though, a lot of the stakeholders, Governor Pritzker being one of them, want this done before May 31st. They don't want this to be one of the things that is unresolved in the hours before adjournment.
Could you imagine how late we'd be here if it was? All right, but so just to pivot here, but stay on the point that the House was sort of went it alone this week. Just a perfect example of ideas happening, but not necessarily having the agreement they need. There were 2 constitutional amendments that got brought up this week. One of them being that would essentially put a 3% surcharge on Illinoisans' income over $1 million. Ben, you covered that pretty thoroughly. Sort of tell us why that stalled and why it's an example of the House doing things in a vacuum this week.
Yeah, it wasn't really something that I felt like was on the agenda going into the week. I had asked both Speaker Welch and President Harmon just last week, what's going on with this? And Speaker Welch is like, well, we're having conversations and whatnot. And the Senate president was a lot more skeptical of the idea overall that it could even pass the legislature. And sure enough, the Senate president was right. And I think there's a lot of reasons probably why this millionaire's tax did not move forward. But, I think there's concern over what happened in 2020 with the graduate income tax, and that failed pretty spectacularly after the governor put a ton of his own money into that, and it was a major campaign promise for him. And, I think a lot of lawmakers got fatigued by that, got the message in some cases from voters maybe. I think, that's what the Senate president told me. He said he thinks voters made themselves pretty clear back then. This is a different question, of course, because it's much more targeted at millionaires. It includes a specific tax rate. But maybe that's also one of the problems, because the value of $1 million is going to change over time. The value of that 3% tax on $1 million is going to change over time. And then what do you actually do with that money? And we heard a lot of competing interests over, should that go to property tax relief or should that go to K-12 education? And, I think a lot of folks had other priorities even beyond that. So I think this just was something that maybe just wasn't ready to go this year. Give it another year, maybe it would have been something that, lawmakers could have found a better solution towards to actually, have the votes to pass this out, which is ultimately why we didn't see a vote on this. But we're not going to see another try on this one until, 2028, ahead of the next time that this can appear on the ballot.
So there was another constitutional amendment that will go to the Senate. Who wants to talk about that one? All right, Ben, it's all you.
Yeah, this is going to be a very interesting constitutional amendment. if voters get to weigh in. And really what this does is it rewrites the redistricting rules in the Constitution, and it creates a priority list of things that lawmakers must consider when they're drawing the maps. So, districts that are equal in population is the number one consideration, but then the second consideration is actually the second section of the Federal Voting Rights Act, which basically protects minority participation in the political process. And Democrats here in Illinois want to insert that into our Constitution because they're afraid that the U.S. Supreme Court is going to strike that part of the federal law down here in the coming weeks or months. And so, they're putting that in as part of redistricting and a factor that must be considered, that you must consider keeping racial groups together. But one of the interesting parts of this is, Illinois Democrats have a long history of gerrymandering districts for their political benefit. Representative Will Guzzardi basically admitted as such on the floor, during debate over this the other day. And that got a lot of response from Republicans who, are arguing that this is just going to be another tool that Democrats could use to draw more districts to increase their already sizable majority here in the legislature. So I'm intrigued to see where this goes in the Senate and how, that chamber responds to it, but also more interested to see how voters would consider this question based on, the things that we've heard from Democrats about this being an important thing that needs to be preserved in our state laws if the federal government gets rid of it, but also the message that we're going to hear from Republicans that, enough is enough of picking your own representatives is the point that they were making on the floor.
Picking your own voters, I think. Representative picking their own voters, I think, is the analogy they made. So, all right, I'm going to move here to Brenden, but first a shameless plug. If you're listening to this still, give us a like and subscribe on YouTube. Andrew Campbell, our videographer, is pumping out videos and content about several of the things we're talking about. You can find there, and Brenden is doing a great job on our Capitol News Insider page, which is free for now. Weeks ago on that page, he had covered the fact that Harry Benton was booted from the House Democratic Caucus. A Democrat from Plainfield, there you go. Jog my memory. Democrat from Plainfield booted from the caucus. We haven't been able to figure out why, hadn't been able to figure out why anyway. We kind of knew. There was some anonymously sourced reporting on it. Our anonymous sources were confirming it with us. Finally, the press corps was able to kind of corner Speaker Welch last night, all of us included here, because he had this news conference outside of his office with members of his caucus. So we finally got him to talk a little bit about Representative Harry Benton. And here's a clip of our questioning of the speaker.
We're not going to have that topic of conversation today. We're going to talk about what happened here today. We're going to talk about this major.
Isn't it time to address it?
He's an elected official. His constituents want to know what's going on.
At the proper time. At the proper time, that information will come out.
Final question.
Pardon? Listen, there is a process in place. You've heard me say this before. People are entitled to due process. There is a process in place that guarantees every one of us due process. And we're going to allow that process to play out. And I think part of that is not coming out and speaking to the press about something and when folks are entitled to due process. But also want to underscore something very important. And we shared this with the caucus. We also have to talk about victims and what they're entitled to. Coming out and talking to reporters about a process that's ongoing is not the proper thing to do. And so we're going to respect due process. We're going to respect victims. We're going to respect people's rights.
So, Brenden, give us a little context there. How long have we been at this? What did you find? What have you found in your reporting?
Yeah, so back in late February, we reported along with several other outlets that Harry Benton had been removed from several of his committees and booted from the House Democratic Caucus, and no reason was given by Democratic leadership. Just we got a big no comment when we asked. Through sourcing, we figured out that there was allegation of sexual harassment made against Representative Benton, and later on found out that a complaint had been filed with the Legislative Inspector General. So for the past 2 months, Representative Benton has been basically exiled, excommunicated from the Democratic Caucus. He's still been showing up to session, but he has not commented on some of these allegations of him being booted. The speaker has refused to talk about this until we kind of cornered him the other day. And, it's a kind of a frustrating thing because obviously he has a lot of constituents who want to know what happened. Why is he basically being shunned in Springfield, and how is that serving them, and how is it maybe impacting their representation, and we're just not getting a lot of answers. The official line, or I guess this would be just through our reporting, is that it's in the hands of the Legislative Inspector General, which the Speaker, as you heard, said that there's a process that we need to let the process play out before we can publicly comment, which is kind of a convenient thing to say. It's a way to avoid talking about a difficult subject matter, and something that we should note too is that the LIG, there is no real timeline on when these investigations have to wrap up, and they are only made public if the allegation is sustained. So it's very possible that we may just never hear about this unless somebody comes forward and provides some more details. So it's just a very frustrating story for us reporters, and for those who just want transparency in government, and for Representative Benton's constituents who want to know what the heck is going on.
Well, and two, the question I had that I shouted at the speaker as they ended the interview was, if you're talking about due process here, did you give him the due process before booting him from caucus? And I didn't get an answer to that. So clearly something's going on.
Yeah, clearly there's something going on, and it's interesting because there are ways that like for instance they removed his Springfield staff, his some of the folks that would assist him, that are actually they're employees of the office of the Speaker. There are ways you can protect staff and try to limit exposure without maybe booting him from the caucus based on an allegation that is being investigated. I do think there are going to be questions about whether Representative Benton got due process, but then again, the Speaker Welch is the one who decides these things. It's his caucus, and he has shown he is not afraid to remove people from his caucus, because Representative Benton is just he's the third. If you recall, last year he kicked out Representative Fred Crespo for kind of going rogue on a budget plan that wasn't authorized by leadership. He booted Representative Mary Flowers due to some of her behavior that was demonizing staff and kind of insulting to other members. So he has shown a willingness to he's shown a willingness to boot members from his own caucus for various reasons. Obviously, I think allegations of sexual harassment would probably be the most serious.
All right, those are the topics I wanted to cover. Any parting thoughts on Bears or other things you two have to discuss before we go here? All right, I see Ben with his hand up.
I just hope the Bears make good choices in the draft this weekend and improve their defensive tackle position. And that's what Bears fans should be focused on over the next few days, because nothing's going to move in Springfield for a little bit here.
What do they got? 4 picks in the top 60? There you go. Let's build some depth on the O-line.
And I'll just add one thing, not Bears related, but baseball related. So Jerry and I are White Sox fans. Ben's unfortunately a Cubs fan. But White Sox rookie sensation Munetaka Murakami has hit a home run in 5 consecutive games. I would say that was a pretty good signing.
Did they win any of them?
Wins and losses don't matter, Jerry. It's all about development.
Okay. Well, on that note, we're going to call it an episode of Capital Cast, a regular podcast of Capital News Illinois. Like, subscribe on YouTube, follow us on wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll be back next week.